And we're back for the second segment of the DMZ America podcast. I'm Scott Stantis coming to you from the right.
And I'm Ted Rall coming to you from the left.
So Ukraine, the story that keeps on giving, some more action, some more stories coming out of it this week. And also I want to charge Ted Rall as being a closet member of the GOP. Ted Rall, are you now, or have you ever been a Republican?
No, I don't know, but I protest. You, sir, have you at last no decency?
Thank you very much. That's the Scott and Ted reenactment of the McCarthy hearings from the mid-1950s. Which we can quote, which is really weird.
You're not dorks at all.
Not at all. Okay, so Ukraine, there's a couple of stories coming out. First off, the New York Times story, I believe it was, Ted, said that Ukraine seems to be losing. There's other areas where I think Russia is losing. I think they're both losing. I think we're entering the quagmire. Quag or quag?
Quag, actually, neither quag nor quag.
The quagmire.
It's a quag. It's a quagmire.
It's a quagmire. Yeah, that's the ticket. Anyway, so what's interesting is to have a mainstream American news source finally say something negative about the Ukrainians and their war effort. Second thing is that a Soviet, Jesus, listen to me, Ted. A Russian.
So in 1991, there was this thing that happened on Christmas Day.
A Russian plane has shot down. It looks like it's shot it down. Initially, it said it actually ran into it, which seems to me if you run into things, they both fall out of the sky. I could be wrong, but we're still gleaning the details from what happened over the Red Sea. But it looks like a Russian plane
over the Black
Sea. A Russian plane shot down a United States drone. So, and many people in the United States are trying to get upset about, this.
It's so funny. Basically, look, what is a Predator drone, but just sort of a very tricked out toy plane, right? Like it's and so they have, it's in international waters off the Black Sea. There's and Russian MiGs downed it somehow, right? They may have knocked into it. The Russian MiG fighters are just like our guys. They're Top Guns. They're flyboys. They're macho. I think I could see look at that little guy. Look at that little bug here. Let me swat him, and then come alongside and flick him with the edge of your wing or whatever. Yeah. I could see that. Boy, I mean, these guys are badass pilots. These are some of the best pilots in the world. So
whatever it is, the Hawks, which is really funny to see. I got to admit, it makes me kind of giggle when I see people, Democrats try to be Hawks, especially the current crop.
Well, they're succeeding. They are the war party.
Yeah. Because, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, and why I'm accusing you of being a Republican, Ted, is that both Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former President Donald Trump are both trying to out peacenik each other on the Ukraine issue. And they make I think a very salient point, one that you've been making for years since this whole damn thing, I guess a year since this thing started, which is America does not have a vital American interest. If you look at the PAL doctrine.
Or a treaty obligation. We have they're not allies. No moral obligation whatsoever to the Ukrainians.
They're not buddies. They're not like distant cousins. They're
not allies. I mean, an ally is a formal designation, which the U.S. does not have. If you look at the State Department website for Ukraine, the page for Ukraine, they use all sorts of weasel words like, they're cool and we like them and we hang sometimes. And
they're handsome people.
Partners. Yeah. They're handsome white people, which is why we like them. But basically, we have no reason to be there. And let's be serious here. When the Russians say to the Ukrainians, you are our bitch, you are on our border, you are in our sphere of influence, not only are they right, they're also right that we would have exactly the same exact attitude about any country that bordered us or even was nearby. And we have that attitude. You're not allowed, if you're Cuba, to have socialism. If you're Grenada, you're not allowed to have socialism. If you're Canada or Mexico, you're our bitch and you do what we say.
Let me ask you this. I'm not sure.
That's not what's going on. That's not like, but the you know, I'm sorry. It's like when the Russians sort of say, this is ours, they're not wrong.
I have a gap in my history here, and that is Mexico's participation or non-participation or peripheral participation in World War II. They had contact with and were making some back channel agreements with the Hitler government. What was America's response to that, if any, if there's any tangible response other than backwater communication, say, knock that shit off?
Well, that's what happened. Basically, the War Department and the State Department got in touch. You know, Cordell Hull was the Secretary of State under FDR at the time. And I happened to have read Hull's memoirs. And he talks about this episode. And basically, he was like, look, you guys know we're busy right now with the Krauts and the Jabs, but cut the shit, or once we beat them, we'll come and get you too. So cut the shit. And they did.
Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, I've tried to use that analogy with people and they just don't seem to get it. That what if in the 1980s or even the early 90s for this moot, but let's say the 1980s, Mexico had said, we're joining the Warsaw Pact. We really feel threatened by the United States militarization. We feel threatened by their ideology, by their racism, by their, they hate brown people. So we're going to,
and they've invaded us a bunch of times, so we know they could do that again.
So we're going to join NATO. We're going to join the Warsaw Pact. What would the United States response to that be?
You answer that question, Scott.
Well, we can all answer that question. Now here's the thing. I want to put,
and we all know we all know the answer, right? I've asked this question to people who like have Ukraine flags tattooed all over their asses, who have drive Ukraine colored cars down the street, who are completely in the tank for Ukraine. They think Zelensky is a god. They're like, and I'm like, Clovis is a god. No, Zelensky is not a god. But you ask them that question, they cannot and will not answer it.
Right. Well, they say, oh, that's preposterous. That's a silly. That's even a stupid question. I go,
I think it's a pretty fucking good question.
Well, I think
when you assess the moral actions of another person or a country or the political actions, you always have to ask yourself, is this something I would do? For example, when you hear about someone cheating on their taxes, you're like, most people are like, I might finagle a little bit on my taxes. Maybe I would not, cheat like crazy, but I might cheat a little. And most people are like not inclined to think that someone who cheats a bit on their taxes is really a bad person who should go to prison. But most people, for example, they hear like, oh, a pedophile. It's like, well, I would never do that. I just wouldn't do that. And so that's part of the reason why the judgment is so harsh, right? And I think if you look at the judgment of, judgment of history against, say, Hitler, you're like, well, these are things that no nation state should do. Our country wouldn't do this. No country we would have anything to do with would do this. Therefore, it's beyond the pale and these people have to be destroyed. You look at Russia in this particular example, it's like, well, would we do this? You bet we would fucking do this. I mean, there's no question we would do this. We have done this. So it's like, it's not even an academic question. We have invaded Mexico many times.
So I want to tap the brakes right here real quick and tell our listeners and our viewers that neither Ted nor I endorsed the invasion of Ukraine. Now we right. see it as a heinous act. I
also think it was a bad move tactically. I think that President Putin should have, I think if he'd been patient, massed the troops, that would have created the crisis that would have forced the Ukrainians to come to the bargaining table. And that would have been enough. I think he moved too quickly. I don't think he needed to go in.
Well, I also think he thought he could win very easily and really underestimated the Ukrainian people and their
that's true. And of course their ability to, get materiel from the United States and NATO.
Right. So what I find interesting, like I said, the GOP, the Republican Party, is the peace party. I mean, how weird is this, folks? How strange is it that,
what is exactly position.
What are you doing? I'm sorry, I have to ask. What are you doing?
Okay, so we live as, I don't know if Republicans believe in heliocentricity, but the Earth rotates throughout the day vis-a-vis its position with the sun. And so what happens is that there's a building. The sun peaks out at certain times. At the beginning of the pod here, the sun was coming in here like I was like a fly under a magnifying glass. But now it's behind a building protected by 12-story building. So it's suddenly dark as hell. It's like the dark side of the moon. So I'm like, okay, I've got to open this thing up or nobody's going to be able to see me. And, we will lose all those precious clicks of people who tune in to see my half of the screen here.
Ted, I'm going to adhere to the Ptolemaic model of the solar system until it's proved wrong.
All right. That's a good point. You beat you.
Is it a good point, really?
I mean, Copernicus did come in, did have trouble with the church, so he must have been wrong.
I love that Copernicus. Side note, history note. Love this. Copernicus did not have his results published, his treatise published until after he died.
That was wise. He saw what happened to Galileo.
No. He was before Galileo.
Oh, all right. He predicted what would happen.
Well, he kind of figured, he was a monk, so he kind of knew what they could do and would do.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to our own planet and human beings blowing each other the hell up. So, are you going to join the Republican Party now? Can we finally say welcome?
First of all, look, it's just I have to admit that when it comes to, the Republicans are still way too warmongery for my taste, but I appreciate the fact that President Trump and Governor DeSantis are skeptical about the Ukraine war. And I appreciate very much that President Trump was willing to talk to the Taliban and agree to a withdrawal from this war that was going nowhere after 20 years. And I appreciate the fact that he was willing to talk to North Korea. That's great stuff. And I would like to see more of it. I'd like to see more diplomacy, less fighting. So, if it's right-wing assholes like DeSantis and Trump who are into that, God bless them. It's not really enough to make me vote for them because I still feel like in this two-party system, it's a trap, and I'm not going to vote for any candidate who I don't mostly agree with. And currently, neither Biden nor Trump nor DeSantis has policies that I mostly agree with.
I got to admit, we're slipping into history talk again real quick, but thinking back, looking at World War I, which the United States had no business entering, and tilted the balance of power. And, it's World War I, read the history. It's so bizarre. It should never have happened. It did. Millions of people died, not, to no clear result. I would have been in the 30s. I would have been an isolationist Republican. No question in my mind. I would have just said, no, we're not going to go into that stupid war over there. That funny man with the silly mustache, let him do it. Let the Europeans deal with it.
Breaking news here on the podcast from the Wall Street Journal. The Swiss government is going to provide a financial lifeline to Credit Suisse if they need it, responding to crumbling investor confidence in the bank. So the Swiss government believes that Credit Suisse is too big to fail.
Well, you mentioned that earlier. I think you're probably right, given who they support. But there are other. Deutsche Bank is going to be next. I suspect. We're not hearing anything, but
a very poorly run bank.
And how do you feel? You're coming from the left. I'm coming from the right, and it still pisses me off when the government steps forward and saves these institutions, which got themselves into these circumstances. This is not, here in the United States with Silicon Valley Bank and with Signature Bank, this is not taxpayer dollars yet. This is FDIC dollars that they're.
Yeah, it's coming from an FDI insurance policy.
And it's not really insurance. Yeah, it
is insurance.
They call it insurance, but it's more of a rainy day fund.
No, it is insurance because it's a rainy day fund. You're right. The banks pay fees to the Fed that end up in this FDIC fund, and it's for things like this. So the problem, of course, with a fund is it's not limitless, and you can't just keep money. Eventually you will run out of money if you keep doing this, and then it will have to come from taxpayer dollars. So it's closer to affecting the taxpayer. Look, the way I look at it, Scott, is that I think Biden and the Fed they get an A-, B+ for their actions in response to this crisis. I think the bailout, it is a bailout, needed to occur, and it needed to occur quickly. This is one of those situations where, despite the injustice, you can't allow. Look at what happened when the moral hazard argument prevailed during the failure of Lehman Brothers. That made things worse. If Lehman had been propped up, the odds are today it would be a healthy institution, employing many tens of thousands of people, and contributing to New York's economy. Now it's just gone, and it didn't really need to be gone, and it made the panic worse. Bear Stearns, it was a different story, I think. But in this particular case, I would look. I got to say, within the constructs of the system, Biden did the right thing, but the system gets an F. I mean, I hate the fact that people are sleeping outside my apartment right now in the cold, where it's 34 degrees, and somehow we're going to give $300 billion to a bunch of tech bros and bank douches. And meanwhile, you could literally, I looked this up, I was working on a cartoon about it that will come out soon. Instead of bailing out SVB and Signature, you could write a check for 400 grand to each homeless person in the United States. Of course, obviously, that's not the system we live in, because no one gives a shit about homeless people. But I wish we did live in that system. So within the construct, it's sort of like saying, wow, Hans, man, he's sure he's the best concentration camp guard in the SS. He's great, man. He's really efficient. So that's what, that to me is the description of what the Fed and the administration are doing. They're doing a great job within the system, but the system itself really has got to be blown up. Capitalism is evil, and the fact that you have to rely on these banks, to otherwise the whole thing comes falling down. It's ridiculous. But we can do the socialism versus capitalism discussion another time, which I'm sure we will.
We often do. Before I let you go, I will get you on the war wagon by giving you this hypothesis, Ted.
Okay,
what if the Russian plane had shot down a flamethrower drone?
Well, first of all, whose flamethrower drone are we talking about?
Ours.
Like yours and mine?
Well,
I mean, I would be, first of all, very pissed off because I do cartoons for Sputnik, and they know about my love of flamethrower drones. So there would be some stern talking to between me and my editor. But yeah, I mean, that's hard to imagine. Also, I would have to hope that we were competent enough to run the flamethrower drone in such a way to prevail in that conflict. Because after all, it is a flamethrower drone.
What does it do? It throws flames. So yeah.
Right. And flames can bring down airplanes. So maybe from a libertarian standpoint, it would be the flamethrower drone's fault for failing to defend itself.
But
it's almost like it's asking for it. Just like hovering there all saucily off the coast of Ukraine. Looking all cute and glimmery.
I thought I could get you to join the war party by throwing out the hypothesis. It didn't work.
No, you had that was a good gambit, Scott. I have to admit. I mean, well played, sir.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to be back right after this. You're listening to the DMZ America podcast. I am, of course, Scott Stantis, coming to you from the right,
and I'm not necessarily Ted Rall, coming to you from the left.
Yeah, with deep fakes, who the hell knows? We're going to talk about reality coming up. Yep. Is it real? We don't know.